At 3 in the morning on a cold November Tuesday, Neil Kowalski pulled his Route 14 bus to the final stop at Allegheny Flats and found a silver Audi parked at the curb with its engine off and a woman inside who looked like she had no intention of moving. He'd driven this route for 9 years. The Flats at that hour was a stretch of closed laundromats, a 24-hour pharmacy nobody used after midnight, and a chain-link fence separating the road from the river. Nobody left a car there voluntarily. Certainly, nobody who owned a vehicle like that. Neil set the brake and watched for a moment through the rain-streaked windshield. The woman was upright in the driver's seat, not slumped. Her head rested against the window, and her arms were folded across her chest the way people folded their arms when they were trying to contain something rather than stay warm. She wore a dark blazer. Her hair had come loose on one side. He had a 10-year-old daughter named Rosie waiting at home with his downstairs neighbor Gloria Perez, who was 73 and made it known every morning that she had not slept well. He had an early start scheduled in 4 hours and a set of brake pads that needed replacing on his own car. He had every practical reason to log his final stop and drive the bus back to the depot. Instead, he stepped off the bus and walked through the rain to the silver car and knocked twice on the passenger window. The woman startled the way people startle when they've been asleep but don't want to admit it. Her eyes found him in the dark, and for 1 second her hand moved toward the door lock. Then she looked at his transit authority jacket and the rain soaking through his shoulders, and something in her face settled just slightly. She lowered the window 2 inches. "Ma'am." Neil kept his voice quiet. "Bus depot's 3 blocks up. There's a waiting area. They keep it heated overnight." She stared at him. Her eyes were dry, which told him she'd finished crying some time ago. "I'm not in any trouble," she said. The voice was controlled, the kind of voice that had given a lot of instructions to a lot of people over the years. Neil glanced at the dashboard. No indicator lights, engine cold. "You've been sitting here without heat in 40-degree rain," he said. "That's not trouble. That's just uncomfortable." Something shifted behind her expression. Not quite gratitude, not quite relief. More like the involuntary response of a person who had been expecting hostility and received something that wasn't. "There's a coffee machine in the depot waiting room," Neil said. "It's terrible, but it's hot." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "All right." Her name was Monica, she told him. Nothing else. She walked with the deliberate steadiness of someone concentrating on not showing how cold she was. Neil held the depot door open and she passed through without looking at him, which he understood. Pride worked that way. The waiting room was fluorescent and beige and smelled faintly of motor oil and old paper cups. Neil put $1 into the coffee machine and handed her what came out without comment. Monica wrapped both hands around the paper cup and sat in one of the plastic chairs along the wall, and for a long time she just looked at the cup. Neil had forms to file and a mileage log to finish. He worked at the counter nearby, not far enough away to suggest he was leaving her alone, not close enough to press her for conversation. It was a balance he'd learned mostly from years of managing Rosie's bad nights without making them worse by hovering. His phone buzzed, a text from Gloria. "Rosie had a nightmare. She's fine now. Go finish your shift." He typed back quickly and then looked up. Monica was watching him. "Daughter," he said. "How old?" 10. He set the phone down. "She has my wife's stubbornness and my mother's talent for guilt. It's a formidable combination." Monica's expression changed just slightly. "Your wife?" "She died 4 years ago. Aneurysm, no warning." He said it plainly, not because it didn't still cost him, but because he'd learned that softening the facts didn't actually soften anything. Monica looked down at her cup. "I'm sorry." "People always say that." He pulled the mileage log toward him. "You never know what else to say." "No," she agreed, "you don't." There was a pause that wasn't quite uncomfortable. "She was a pediatric nurse," Neil said. "She believed every problem was solvable if you paid attention long enough. Rosie got that too." He signed the log. "I got the part where I drive the same roads every night and try not to complain about it." Monica almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to her face, but it came close. She didn't tell him her last name. She didn't tell him anything about the silver car or the blazer or the leather bag she'd carried inside like it held something irreplaceable. Neil didn't ask. He knew when information was being rationed and he understood the reasons. He'd rationed plenty himself after Karen died, when the whole world seemed to want the shape of his grief and he had nothing left to give anyone. He finished his paperwork and offered to call a shelter. Monica's shoulders tightened immediately, and he recognized the specific kind of pride that couldn't tolerate that word. "The depot has a back office they don't use after midnight," he said instead. "There's a couch. I can ask the overnight dispatcher. They won't care." I don't want to put anyone out, Monica said. You're not putting me out. You're sitting in a plastic chair at 3:15 in the morning in wet shoes. He looked at her. One night. Tomorrow you figure out the next step. She agreed the same way she'd agreed to the coffee, not warmly but without pretense. The following morning, Gloria Perez took one look at Monica through Neil's apartment doorway and decided that all of Neil's careful boundaries were optional. She arrived with a container of chicken soup, a clean blouse she'd borrowed from her daughter's closet, and the opinion that a woman who slept on a depot couch deserved at minimum a proper breakfast. Monica sat at Neil's kitchen table eating scrambled eggs while Gloria talked about the neighborhood, the building's broken boiler, and the city council member who had promised to fix the North Side Community Center parking lot 3 consecutive election cycles. Rosie appeared from the hallway in her school clothes and evaluated Monica with the complete absence of social filtering that only children under 12 could manage. You have mascara on your cheek, Rosie said. Rosie, Neil's voice carried a warning. It's fine, Monica touched her face and found the smear, I know. Dad cries in the car sometimes, Rosie offered. He thinks I don't know because he uses the garage. Neil set down his spatula. That is a significant misrepresentation of occasional. It's okay, Rosie said to Monica, apparently deciding Neil's defense was irrelevant. Strong people cry in private. Dad taught me that. He just taught me while being an example. Monica looked at Rosie for a long moment. Then she looked at Neil, and whatever calculation she'd been running since the parking lot the night before seemed to arrive at a slightly different result. That afternoon, Neil came home from sleeping to find the local news playing on the television Gloria had left on in the living room. A reporter stood outside a glass tower in downtown Pittsburgh. Behind him, the Allegheny Regional Health System logo was visible on the building's entrance wall. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Board chair calls for calm following CEO's departure." Monica stood in the kitchen doorway. She had seen it before Neil had. Monica Harwell, he said. She didn't move. She had the stillness of someone who had been waiting for this moment and had already decided how to receive it. Neil had driven past that building 200 times. He knew the name Harwell from the fundraiser banners they put up downtown and from Gloria complaining that the hospital had closed the North Side Satellite Clinic 2 years ago and made elderly patients take 3 buses to get a blood pressure check. You're the CEO they let go, he said. She waited. He understood she was waiting to see what recognition would do to him. The news is saying you mismanaged funds, he said. The news is saying what my husband told them to say. Her voice was even. He is the board chair. He controls the communication team. Neil turned off the television. He sat across from her at the kitchen table the way he sat with Rosie when something needed to be said carefully. Then tell me what actually happened. She studied him. He thought she was going to decline. But she'd had 3 days in a car and 1 night on a depot couch, and the people she'd trusted had left one by one until there was nobody left who wasn't afraid of Bradley Harwell's phone calls. So she told him. Monica Harwell had spent 11 years rebuilding Allegheny Regional from a mid-tier regional system into something her father, a family physician in the Hill District for 30 years, would have recognized as medicine. She'd expanded community outreach, opened the Northside Satellite Clinic that served uninsured patients, and negotiated contracts that kept rural hospitals from closing. Her father had died before seeing most of it. She'd kept his patient ledgers in her office as a reminder that the numbers on a hospital's balance sheet were people who couldn't afford to be a number. Bradley had come in as a management consultant during her 3rd year as CEO. He was persuasive and organized and understood institutional politics in a way that had looked like partnership and turned out to be reconnaissance. He'd become board chair after Monica recommended him. She'd believed for years that they wanted the same things. The satellite clinic on North Side had been his first real objection. He called it a liability. She called it an obligation. The disagreement became a pattern. Bradley framing her judgment as sentimentality, Monica watching the board composition shift year by year toward people whose loyalty traced back to him rather than to the mission. The embezzlement had taken her 8 months to find. 3 subsidiary accounts, vendor contracts routed through a company with no employees, and a consulting invoice paid to a firm that shared an address with Bradley's brother-in-law. Monica had gone to the health system's compliance officer on a Tuesday. By Friday, Bradley had filed an emergency board motion alleging that Monica had created a hostile executive environment, made unilateral financial decisions without board approval, and exhibited behavior that raised concerns about her fitness to lead. The CFO, Tara Winslow, had been preparing statements for 6 months. Emails, altered audit summaries, and testimony from a department director whose contract renewal was pending. Monica's office was cleared while she was at her attorney's office on Monday. A deputy was present when she came to retrieve personal items. Bradley had watched from the conference room window. He said I should find somewhere to stay that wasn't too public, Monica said. There were press inquiries already. Neil's jaw was tight. He planned it. Every detail. She looked at the kitchen window. I've been in boardrooms my entire career. I know how people prepare for adversarial outcomes. I never thought I was the outcome he was preparing for. That night, a news segment posted a photograph of Monica entering Neil's building. The caption described Neil as an unidentified individual providing accommodations to the former CEO. A source close to the board declined to speculate about the nature of the relationship. Neil's supervisor called at 6 the next morning. The transit authority had a policy regarding employees who became the subject of ongoing media coverage in connection with persons under institutional investigation. He would need to report to HR. Neil held the phone after the call ended and looked at his hands. He had $19 in checking, $300 in savings, and a brake job he'd been putting off for 6 weeks. Rosie stood in the hallway in her pajamas, watching him. Monica came out of the spare room. She had heard the call. I'll cover your income, she said, while I still have access to. No. His voice was quiet but definite. You don't get to turn what I did into a business transaction because it makes you feel less like a burden. Monica recoiled slightly. He immediately regretted the sharpness of it, but he didn't take it back, because the sharpness was honest and she deserved honesty more than she needed comfort. People make choices, he said. I made mine. You don't owe me anything for it. She looked at him for a long moment. I've spent 15 years in a system where everything is owed and nothing is freely given. Then maybe you've been working in the wrong system. Rosie, who had been pretending to look at the cereal box, turned to Monica. Dad also says the right thing is usually the thing nobody else is doing, she said. That's how you know it's right, because it's lonely. Monica said nothing for a moment, then she sat down at the kitchen table. 3 nights later, someone slid a printout under Neil's apartment door. It was a tabloid article with the headline circled in red marker. Beneath the circle in block letters, "Watch your kid." Neil showed it to the police officer who took his report. The officer photographed it and promised to file it. He also asked, with careful neutrality, whether Neil had considered that the situation might be safer if Monica found other accommodations. Gloria appeared before the officer had finished. She noted that threatening a child constituted criminal harassment, that the building had 3 stairwell cameras Neil had paid for out of pocket 2 years ago, and that she would personally hand-deliver the footage to whoever needed it. The officer left. Neil stood in the hallway. Monica had her bag packed by the time he came back inside. This is exactly what he wants, Neil said. You move, he wins. He has people watching Rosie's school, Monica said quietly. I'm sorry, I didn't know they were that close. Neil went still. The landlord knocked an hour later. He was a man named Curtis who handled building concerns with the emotional range of someone reading terms and conditions. He explained that the situation was creating a disturbance. He used the phrase "people like you" bring consequences in a way that suggested he'd thought carefully about the phrasing, but not carefully enough. Gloria appeared in the hallway. Her method of persuasion involved specifics: 2 unreplaced ceiling fixtures, a hallway smoke detector missing its battery, and a heating unit that had been tagged in a maintenance request 11 months prior. Curtis left without finishing his sentence. Monica packed anyway. Neil stood in the doorway. Running from pressure is what got you into a parking lot at 3 in the morning, he said. Standing still is what got your name in the news. My name was already there. I drive a city bus. The question is whether you let the people making noise decide what it means. She set the bag down, not because she was convinced, but because she was too tired to argue against something that was probably true. The City Health Commission had scheduled a public hearing on the Northside Community Health Initiative. The project had been stalled since Monica's removal. The board, under Bradley's direction, had recommended halting the clinic's re-establishment pending a financial review. Community health advocates had demanded the public hearing. Bradley's team issued a statement barring Monica from representing Allegheny Regional in any official capacity. A formal cease and desist threatened litigation if she disclosed any internal documents at the hearing. Her attorney called it a dangerous position. Monica called it a tactic. She spent 5 days rebuilding the case from what she had preserved before her office was cleared. She had printed copies of the original clinic proposal, the financial models, and the subsidiary account records the Tuesday she'd gone to compliance. Before her access was suspended, before the deputy arrived with moving boxes. She had been careful enough after 11 years to understand that carefulness mattered most in the moments just before everything broke. Neil sat with her at the kitchen table on the fourth night, looking at the map. "My route goes through this neighborhood," he said. "I drive these streets every night." Monica looked at the displacement estimates. The board's revised plan reduces the clinic catchment area by 60%. 63,000 residents in that zone have no primary care access within 2 miles. "Gloria's doctor is in Shadyside," Neil said. "She takes 2 buses and a transfer. She's 73. Monica looked at him. "They know that," Neil said. "They made the decision anyway." She looked back at the map. When she spoke, her voice was quieter. "Bradley has always believed that people who can't advocate for themselves are manageable. I thought the institution I built would protect them when I couldn't. You built something he's using against you." "Yes." Neil pushed the map toward her. "Then go get it back." The night before the hearing, Monica received a settlement offer. Bradley would release her personal accounts, clear the misconduct allegations from her professional record, and withdraw the civil claims. She would resign formally, surrender board voting authority, and sign a non-disclosure agreement. Her attorney called it the best offer she'd receive. Monica sat alone in Neil's spare room and read it on her phone. She was still sitting there at 4 in the morning when Neil heard footsteps in the hallway and then the front door. He found her in the parking lot, in the driver's seat of the Audi with the settlement open on her screen and the engine off. The same posture as the night at Allegheny Flats. Different lot, same silence. He knocked on the window. She lowered it. "I was thinking," she said. "At 4 in the morning in a parking lot. If I sign, your name is out of the papers. Rosie goes back to school without cameras. Gloria doesn't have to threaten the landlord anymore." Neil stood in the cold. "That's one way to think about it." "What's another way?" "Signing it doesn't get you your life back. It gets Bradley an agreement that you won't tell anyone what he did." Neil leaned against the car door. "Those aren't the same thing." Monica stared at the phone. "Rosie left something on the back seat," Neil said. Monica turned. On the back seat was a sheet of notebook paper folded into thirds. She unfolded it, in uneven handwriting that pressed too hard on certain letters. "You know how hospitals work. Dad knows how neighborhoods work. That's 2 kinds of knowing. Don't let them make one of you go away. Rosie K." Monica stared at it for a long time. The paper was purple-lined, torn from a school notebook. The K at the end was Rosie's addition, as though the last name were needed for authority. She deleted the settlement offer. The civic hearing took place in a public building near the Strip District with terrible acoustics and excellent natural light. Community health advocates, neighborhood council members, hospital employees, and 3 city commissioners filled the rows. Bradley's team occupied a block of seats near the front, organized and coordinated and visibly confident. Monica arrived in a charcoal blazer Gloria had pressed with a travel iron. Neil sat in the back row, not because she'd asked, but because he understood what an empty bench could say about a person standing alone at the front. Bradley's attorney moved to bar Monica from speaking before she reached the registration desk. Commissioner Allen, who had run public hearings for 12 years and had seen most variations of obstruction, informed him that standing was established by relevance, not corporate status. Monica gave her name and her title. She was still chief executive of record until the board's internal investigation reached a formal conclusion. That conclusion had not been issued. The objection was noted and overruled. Bradley presented first. He was polished in the way that came from decades of rooms that rewarded polish. He described the clinic's funding gap as a structural reality. He described the board's caution as responsible stewardship. He used the phrase community partnership to describe the process of reducing services while commissioning reports that called the reduction a strategy. When commissioners pressed on the displacement figures, his CFO Tara Winslow offered projections that omitted uninsured patients, patients in transitional housing, and patients enrolled in a county health program whose eligibility had been processed through the clinic's administrative staff. Monica waited. Commissioner Allen eventually looked toward the rear of the room. "Is there additional testimony from parties with standing?" Monica walked to the front. She did not accuse Bradley of anything that wasn't already in the record. She put her laptop on the commission table, connected it to the presentation system, and showed them 2 sets of numbers. The first was Bradley's displacement model. The second was the actual resident data, cross-referenced with county health records, and 2 years of clinic intake logs, that Monica had maintained in a personal system after the hospital's data team was restructured under Tara's supervision. The gap between the two was not an error. It was a decision. She explained how the uninsured patient population had been reclassified as a separate administrative category in a policy change made 14 months ago, after Monica had raised the clinic re-establishment proposal and before the board had rejected it. She showed the internal memo authorizing the reclassification. She showed the date. Commissioner Allen asked who had authorized the reclassification. Tara Winslow began to answer. Bradley touched her arm. Monica opened a second file. A chain of internal communications, printed before her office was cleared, between Bradley and two outside vendors whose contracts had been awarded without competitive bidding. 3 of those contracts related to the financial review that had been used to justify halting the clinic project. One vendor shared a registered address with Tara Winslow's former employer. Bradley rose. Those documents were obtained in violation of... They were printed from my work computer, Monica said. On the Tuesday I reported to compliance, before my access was suspended, before I was removed. I accessed nothing I didn't have authorization to access at the time I accessed it. The room shifted. She continued for 3 hours. She answered commissioners' questions without notes. She explained the original funding model, the grant structures, the county health partnership that the board had allowed to expire. She described what the North Side Clinic had been and what it would cost to rebuild under the original proposal versus the cost of emergency care for 63,000 residents without primary access. The numbers were not abstract. Neil in the back row knew the route numbers she was describing. He knew the transfer points and the wait times and the faces of the patients he saw on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, sitting in the priority seats with paper appointment reminders, writing to doctors in other neighborhoods because the one in theirs had been deemed a liability. Bradley left before the final session. Tara remained at the commission's request. The commission adjourned to deliberate. 6 days later, the clinic reestablishment was approved under the original community partnership framework, with an independent oversight committee and a full financial audit of the subsidiary accounts Monica had flagged. Bradley resigned from the board before the audit began. Tara's professional conduct was referred to the state bar. Monica was reinstated as CEO by the reconstituted board. She did not move back into the house she and Bradley had shared. She went once with an attorney and a property officer and retrieved her father's patient ledgers from a cabinet in the study and a photograph from the hallway wall. The house was sold. The proceeds went partly to legal costs and partly to a workforce development fund for clinic support staff. Neil heard about the audit outcome from Gloria, who had heard it from a neighbor who watched the local news at a volume audible through the ceiling. He was in the kitchen making Rosie's lunch when Monica came back. She stood in the doorway in a navy coat that fit correctly, and her hair arranged the way it had been the first night, except that nothing else about her was the same as that first night. The commission approved the original plan, she said. Neil put the lid on the peanut butter, I heard. I'm officially reinstated. She paused. They offered me a formal press event. I declined. That sounds like you. She looked at the kitchen for a moment, at the table where they'd sat over financial records, at the chair where Rosie had written her note, at the counter where Gloria had placed her soup container with the authority of someone who understood that warmth and intrusion were sometimes the same thing. I came to return your spare key, Monica said. Neil held out his hand. She placed it in his palm. He set it on the counter and went back to making lunch. You could also stay for coffee, he said. It's better than the transit depot machine. That is an extremely low bar. I know. She stayed. The North Side Community Health Clinic reopened 9 months later. Gloria attended the ribbon cutting with Rosie, who had requested a yellow hard hat specifically and refused to remove it for the duration of the ceremony. Neil stood near the entrance in a new transit jacket that had his name on the pocket and, below the name, a secondary line. Community Advisory Board, Northside Health Initiative. He had been asked to join the advisory board because Monica had told the oversight committee that the most useful community voice in the clinic's planning process would be someone who drove its streets every night and knew which transfer stops were inaccessible and which neighborhoods had no coverage after 7 p.m. Neil had been skeptical. He'd agreed anyway. Monica spoke at the ceremony. She talked about her father. She talked about what institutions owed to the communities they claimed to serve, and what happened when the people inside those institutions began to believe the institution existed for their own benefit. She did not mention Bradley. She did not mention the parking lot at 3 in the morning, or the depot couch, or the 4 a.m. moment in a cold car when she had almost signed away everything her father had practiced medicine to protect. Afterward, Rosie found her outside and reported that she was considering becoming an engineer or possibly a bus driver. Those are very different things, Monica said. Dad says you can decide later. He decided to be a bus driver when he was 38, and that worked out. Monica looked toward Neil, who was talking to a group of clinic nurses and appeared to be describing something about loading dock logistics, with a seriousness that suggested he had strong opinions about it. He seems to figure things out, Monica said. Mostly, Rosie agreed. He still cries in the garage sometimes. She looked up at Monica, but less than before. That winter, Neil drove Route 14 past the clinic on Tuesday and Thursday mornings and watched the lights on inside. He watched patients go through the front door with appointment reminders and come out looking like people who had been seen. He watched Gloria go in on the third Thursday of each month and come out with her blood pressure numbers written on a card in her coat pocket, holding it the way she held things she considered important. On a Friday evening in December, Monica stopped by the apartment to drop off a document Rosie had asked her to review for a school project on community infrastructure. She stayed for dinner. Gloria appeared within 11 minutes of Monica's car appearing in the lot, which Neil had long since stopped pretending was a coincidence. After Rosie went to bed, Neil and Monica sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the particular quiet of people who had said most of the important things and no longer needed to say them all at once. "Do you think about that night?" he said. "Which part?" "The window, when I knocked." Monica turned the coffee cup in her hands. "I think about the moment before you knocked. I was sitting in that car trying to decide whether what I was feeling was failure or something else." "What did you decide?" "I hadn't decided anything. Then you knocked." She looked toward the window. "I think I was grateful that someone interrupted the decision." Neil was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, I almost didn't." "I know." She looked at him. "I'm glad you're the kind of person who does the thing he almost didn't do." Outside, Pittsburgh was cold and clear and the north side lights were on. Gloria could be heard through the ceiling, watching television at her preferred volume. Rosie slept with a framed copy of her purple-lined note on her nightstand, the one Monica had returned to her with a small silver pin attached that read Community Advisor in letters just large enough to read. Neil Kowalski had driven the same roads for 9 years before that November night. He had learned to recognize the kind of loneliness that came not from being alone but from being unseen. He'd carried his own version of it for 4 years, mostly quietly, mostly in the garage. He hadn't knocked on that window because he expected anything from it. He'd done it because a person was cold and he was standing close enough to help. And that had always seemed to him like enough of a reason. It still did.